Unless you're willing to drive your new car into a wall, you can't tell whether it's safe or unsafe in the event of an accident. Fortunately, there are people who do that for you. But instead of driving themselves into a wall, they use crash test dummies loaded with sensors to test it. Let's take a step back because this past October I was invited to go to Germany to witness the crash test of an electric car, a Chinese-made but Mexican-assembled Jac ES1. This car was all ready to be sold in the Latin American market. The crash test was a complete disaster, giving it a score of 0 stars over 5 and thus turning it into one of the most unsafe new cars in the entire world. I'd like to tell you all about the backstage of a crash test, something very few people know about. How cars are tested, who's in charge, who pays for them, how are cars chosen, and above all, what determines the results. Besides, of course, talking about what it is like to be only a few meters away from a car getting completely wrecked against a wall at 40 miles an hour. Throughout the world, organizations called NCAPs, NCAP, are in charge of organizing crash tests for the respective markets such as Euro NCAP in Europe, Global NCAP in India and Africa, and for the Latin American market, it's LatinNCAP who's in charge of carrying out these crash tests. Just as a side note, for North America, it is completely different organizations such as the NHTSA or the IIHS that are in charge of crash tests. You've probably realized this already by now, but English is not my native language. In fact, I am an Argentinian currently living in Madrid, Spain. So thanks in part to being well connected with the Latin American car community and to being the huge car safety nerd that I am, I managed to get an invitation to witness one of these crash tests in Landsberg Am Lech, near Munich. As there is no suitable crash test lab in all of Latin America, all cars to be sold in that market have to be shipped to Europe and crash tested in a lab belonging to the ADAC, the German Automobile Club. In the lab awaited us the aforementioned Jac ES1, bought by a mystery shopper in a dealership in Puebla, Mexico. All cars are bought anonymously from dealers to ensure they are not specially prepared by the manufacturer for the test. As LatinNCAP receives no funding from any government, they do not have enough budget to test all cars that are sold in Latin America, so most cars go untested. Many brands hope this is the case with their cars. Once the vehicle is already bought, LatinNCAP calls the manufacturer, informs them that their car is about to be tested, and asks them for all the technical data regarding the car. In this case, Jac decided to cut off all communications and did not reply to any more calls or emails once they heard what was going to happen to their car. After finding out the results, it becomes very obvious why they did so. This unit in particular was green, and in my personal opinion, as a third-party guest watching the test, I must say it's a bit of an eyesore. A bit of an eyesore just as you might say you're a bit hurt after being shot in the chest. It's among the cheapest electric cars that you can buy in the markets where it is sold, with a 60 horsepower engine and about 300 kilometers of range. It's generally with these types of cars to be sold in completely unregulated markets that you already know the results are not going to look good. These results are presented on a scale that goes from 0 to 5 stars. On 0-star cars, there are over 95% chances of getting life-threatening injuries, whilst on 5-star cars, those chances are almost nil. There is also a more detailed complementary percentage-based scale that indicates how well protected adults, children, and pedestrians are. In a safe car from the A pillar, this one here, onwards, you need to have deformation. That's what's called the crumple zone and is the area in the car that is designed to absorb energy in the event of a crash, minimizing injuries by deceleration. On the other hand, between the A pillar and the C pillar, cars are designed to have minimal deformation. That's what's called the safety cell. What you want to avoid is the interior collapsing around the occupants. You want to be able to open all doors and to be able to climb in and out of the car without any deformation or random pieces of the car attacking you during the collision. But that only happens on 5-star cars such as the Volkswagen Nivus. But if you follow me here, we've got a 0-star car. 0 stars means that there is a significant risk of getting life-threatening injuries in a crash. This is a Great Wall, a best-selling Chinese-made pickup that was crash tested at the exact same speed as the Volkswagen, 40 miles an hour. Remember what I said about how the safety cell between the A and the C pillar shouldn't deform? Well, that didn't really happen here. You can see the driver's door is all bent. If I climb in the car, The driving position is absolutely compromised. The footwell has collapsed and is on the ground, whilst the steering wheel is facing up. Remember, this is only 64 kilometers an hour, and if I had been driving this pickup in the crash, it's likely I would not have survived. A short while before this, the engineers at the lab made a troubling discovery. The car had no emergency power supply cutoff in the event of an accident, something absolutely standard in all but the very worst electric cars. This meant that there was no fuse or manual cutoff, and thus there would still be live battery and live electricals after the crash. This meant we wouldn't be able to touch the car until every single panel was checked with a multimeter, else we could be electrocuted. Makes you think about what could happen to unaware first responders in a real-life situation. Just before impact, the most important part of the test was missing. The dummies were not inside the car. I should mention that these dummies weighed 75 kilograms, are as tall as an average human, and cost nearly $1 million. Yes, you heard that right, $1 million. So, in a clearly well thought out decision, they chose the stronger and under no circumstances extremely clumsy person among all the journalists to put the dummy into the car. Yes, they chose me. And what you're seeing now is a failed attempt where I tried to load a heavy dummy into a compact car. Oh, but before that I had to tie its shoelaces, because if you're crashing into an aluminum block at 74 kilometers an hour, you might as well do it with style and wearing proper shoes. With the crash test dummies in and all other measurements taken, the car was sent towards the end of the 70-meter long tunnel. Now, all that's left is waiting. I took advantage of this to duct tape a GoPro on the ground, hoping I'd have my own slow motion shot. The lights go on and shine like a second sun. A very bright environment is needed for the high-speed cameras to work. Now, only seconds to go. There is no way for a microphone to capture a truthful rendition of just how loud the explosion-like sound the car makes as it crashes is. But do you know what is equally as frightening? The silence that follows. It is during that silence that your Neanderthal caveman adrenaline goes away. Whatever primal pleasure you might derive from seeing something expensive get destroyed fades. And thus, you remember why you're actually there. This isn't fun, as cool as it may seem. What you're watching in simulated form is a situation that many people all throughout Latin America will experience firsthand. You realize that the dummy that you awkwardly placed onto the driver's seat is not just plastic, but represents the very real flesh of hundreds of thousands of people who will inexorably occupy any of the 5 seats of a Jac ES1 at some point in their lives. It may be a friend of yours, an acquaintance, or perhaps even someone who subscribed to this channel. So you look again at the smashed vehicle, while the engineers check that it won't catch on fire or electrocute anyone. The driver seems to be dancing like in Michael Jackson's Thriller, its hands and arms clearly affected by the crumpled and deformed safety cell of the interior. At that time I felt anger, rage. This crash test represents all the people who will be handicapped or who will lose their lives in this car and other very unsafe models sold all over Latin America. It's not a question of if someone will be hurt, it's a question of how many. You'll hear the deafening sound of metal and plastics flying all over the place all day, but by dinner time it becomes very easy to forget that what you actually saw was real. 3 months later, the results come in. 0 stars overall, 0% protection for adult occupants, 6% protection for children seated in the back, and 20% protection for pedestrians. Absolutely atrocious results. You could have guessed it right after the crash. Just notice how much the A-pillar bent, the floor of the car is completely damaged. The driver smashes the back of his head against the windowsill and later gets hit by the interior crumpling around him. You'd definitely not want to be inside that car. Meanwhile, these cars are selling like crazy in Mexico or Uruguay, and there is a slogan promoting them as very eco-friendly cars. This last bit may be true, but it is not very occupant-friendly. Don't think this is only about Chinese brands. Previous tests have shown how even very well-established automakers such as Nissan, Chevrolet or Ford treat Latin American customers as second-class citizens. Governments in the region set much lower standards for these markets. In fact, crash tests are not even compulsory. If it weren't for LatinNCAP, no one would know how safe or unsafe these vehicles are. I'd like to thank everyone behind the LatinNCAP team for answering all my questions, and to the people of Autoblog Uruguay for making sure I was invited to the event. This test has made me reconsider how much I think of safety every time I get a new vehicle. I hope you liked this video. Please subscribe as well as like it and comment on it, as it is very important to ensure the growth of this new channel. Cheers and see you next time.